Well, welcome back to the Federal Retirement Show. I'm your host, Val Majewski, Vice President of Sales and Marketing here at American Benefits Exchange. I appreciate you taking the time out to join us for another episode. Today, we're going to be talking about a tax-free retirement strategy using Roth IRAs. Now, why do we do this? It's important because we've been getting asked questions about these things. That's why we know it's important. And recently, with everything going on in the world and why things are going on, or the questions we're getting asked is how are we going to mitigate these things, or where do we see taxes going, and how do I properly prepare for retirement? The big question has been revolving around taxes. And federal employees in general have been asking me or talking to me about the mitigation of their future tax liability. And how do we do so? How do we prepare properly for retirement, and how do we reduce our tax liability and try to kick Uncle Sam out of our pocket as much as we can in retirement? Because if you weren't aware, Uncle Sam is a big partner of yours in retirement. And so really the question I've been asking federal employees in response to that is, well, which direction? It all depends on which direction you think taxes are going to go in. You think taxes in the future are going to go up or going to go down? And the consensus, the majority, it's not unanimous, but the consensus is that taxes are going to go up. And again, I'm not making this up. I'm just reporting the news here and sharing with you the data that I've gotten from other federal employees that I've talked to across the country. The consensus, the majority are saying that they believe taxes are going to go up in the future. Now, if you've watched our previous episode about calculating future retirement, most federal employees that I talk to want to get to about 100% of their net take-home pay in retirement. So they want to have relatively the same take-home pay in retirement that they had when they were working. Now, if taxes go up in the future, how's that going to affect your net take-home pay? You're going to take home less because more will be going to taxes. So how do we mitigate our future tax liability? Well, there are several different tax-free retirement sources or ways in which you can reduce tax liability in retirement. We're going to talk about one of them today called a Roth IRA. Now, you may have heard of Roth IRAs before. I'm going to go into some detail about what they are and how they can benefit you. If you're a federal employee and you contribute to TSP, you can also save money in your Roth portion of your TSP. Now, this is not a Roth IRA because you can have a Roth TSP, which is a 401k, and a Roth IRA at the same time as long as you qualify for one. Now, what are Roth IRAs? Well, this is a type of retirement savings account where you put in after-tax dollars. That money goes into the account. It grows over time with interest, depending upon the type of vehicle you have it in. And then when you withdraw the money in the future, every dollar, your contributions plus the earnings are tax-free. So you have essentially prepaid the taxes. You've paid the taxes now, and every dollar you take out in the future will be tax-free. Unlike, say, the traditional portion of your TSP, where you get a tax deduction on your contributions today, so you do not pay tax on the money that you're putting in to your traditional TSP. It will then grow with interest, and all of the money, your contributions plus interest in the end, will be taxable as ordinary income when you take withdrawals. So it's the big question: when do you want to pay tax? Now or later? Well, let's say that you wanted to save additional money for retirement on a tax-free basis, and you were thinking about starting a Roth IRA. What does that look like? Well, a Roth IRA is great, again, for tax-free retirement, but it's a little restrictive, and I'm going to explain. It's not to say it's a bad deal or anything like that. I just want to tell you it's a little restrictive, and I'll give you the reasons why. Looking at the bullet points here, it's restrictive in how much you can contribute per year. So you're only limited to $6,000 per year per person. Now, this is not per account. So if you had the thought, hey, I might as well just open 10 Roth IRAs, it's still $6,000 total to a Roth IRA or multiple Roth IRAs per person per year. Now, if you're 50 or older, you can increase that to $7,000. So you get a little bit of a catch up, right? $7,000 per year for those that are 50 or older. Contributions, because we're prepaying the tax, are not tax deductible. This is money you've already paid tax on. So after-tax dollars go into the Roth IRA to have tax-free dollars come out on the back end. Now, you can contribute for a non-working spouse. Why is this important? Because you have to have a job in order to contribute to a Roth IRA. So once retired, if you're not working, you can no longer contribute to a Roth IRA. But if you're a working person, you have a non-working spouse, you can also contribute for them. Now, your principal, money that you put in a Roth IRA, is available on day one. Now, why would I say that? Because it's going to come to our next slide where we talk about the 5-year rule and why you got to keep the money in there for a certain period of time. So this is another restriction when it comes to Roth IRAs. So I'm going to skip to my third bullet point here on this next slide, because the other restriction that Roth IRAs have is the money needs to stay in there for at least 5 years. At least you cannot start withdrawing money that you've earned, the earnings on a Roth IRA, for at least 5 years. So that's where the 5-year rule comes into play. Earnings cannot be withdrawn until 5 years down the road, okay? Now, as I mentioned before, growth in the account is tax-free. Distributions in the end are tax-free, but it's restrictive a little bit on the front end of how much you can put in, even if you want to put in a lot more, and when you can start taking out the earnings. I said your principal, day one, is liquid, so you can access that at any point, but you cannot take out the earnings for at least 5 years. Now, distributions, income that you get from a Roth IRA, do not count towards the Social Security income tax, or when it comes when it comes to Social Security taxation. That's a totally different subject. If you have questions about that, please reach out to us. This is about what portion of your Social Security benefits that you collect in retirement will be subject to tax. There's an earnings test for that to see how much of what portion of your Social Security will be taxable. Distributions from your Roth IRA will not count towards that. There are no required minimum distributions with a Roth IRA. So if you have money that is in your traditional TSP, let's say, and you retire and you leave it in TSP, you leave it where it's at, it's still in the traditional account, you are required to start taking withdrawals known as RMDs, required minimum distributions, once you turn age 72. That restriction goes away in a Roth IRA. Now, here's the other funny thing. If you have your money in a Roth TSP, so even though it's in the Roth in TSP, you are required to take RMDs from that account. Now, generally speaking, RMDs have you start taking withdrawals so you can start paying taxes on things. But with Roth TSP, the money's not taxable. They just want you to start taking the money out. But if you move your money when you're eligible to do so from your Roth TSP into a Roth IRA, now you avoid that RMD requirement. Pretty awesome stuff. Now, when it comes to paying the taxes and prepaying these, that way there's no taxable implications down the road. This is the way that you can now set up your heirs, your loved ones, when it comes to your beneficiaries, with a tax-free legacy gift. Tax-free, whatever's left in your account goes to them tax-free. So you can prepay the taxes for your beneficiaries. Now, the other thing too is you can decide when you want to take distributions, because you're not required to do so. I just talked about the RMDs. You can take that money out at any point. You can leave it in there. You don't have to, or you're not required, you're not forced to take money out of your IRA at any point. Pretty awesome stuff. Now, I said earlier that Roth IRAs are restrictive, and we talked about how much you can contribute to a Roth IRA. We talked about the 5-year rule with a Roth IRA. Another way in which they restrict a Roth IRA access, or who can contribute to a Roth IRA, is based upon your income. So if your modified adjusted gross income is above a certain amount, I'm sorry, but you cannot contribute to a Roth IRA for that calendar year. Now, what are those limits, and who is restricted on this? Well, if you're married filing jointly and you make $214,000 or above as far as your modified adjusted gross income, you are not eligible to contribute to a Roth IRA for that calendar year. There's actually a phase out which begins at $205,000. So your contributions to your Roth are restricted once you start getting at $205,000 or above, and then they're eliminated, meaning you cannot put anything into a Roth IRA if you made more than $214,000. Now, these are the new numbers for 2022. If you're a single tax filer, if you make more than $144,000, you cannot contribute to a Roth IRA for that given year. Your phase out actually starts at $130,500, meaning they'll start limiting the amount you can put into a Roth IRA above $130,500. But once you hit 144, nope, not contributing for that year. So if you've put in money into your Roth IRA and you've made more than the limit for that year, you have to then take that money out of your Roth IRA, technically, for that year. You can't have it in there. You can get penalized for it. So it's important to know what the limits are as far as contributions to a Roth IRA are, what the maximum income you can earn is in order to contribute to a Roth IRA, and also when that phase out starts. So that brings us to another point. Well, you may say, well, Val, this is a moot point for me because I make too much money, or I want to put in more than $6,000 a year, so I'm not even going to contribute to a Roth IRA. I find it too restrictive. It's not for me. But how can I still turn my retirement income, my retirement money, into tax-free money? Because this is a question we get asked, right? This is a part of the biggest question we get asked. Not necessarily how can I contribute more to a supplemental retirement plan that's tax-free. Most of these questions are coming from people nearing retirement saying, how can I eliminate my tax liability or reduce my tax liability? I don't have time to contribute to a Roth IRA. What are my options? And that's where we get to a Roth conversion. Typically, this is going to be more for the people that have put money into a traditional type account, a traditional IRA or a 401k or some other kind of pre-tax vehicle, right? Money that you've put in pre-tax, it has not been taxed, and in a typical fashion, if you were to let it ride and have to take money out down the road, all of the money, your contributions plus interest, would be subject to tax as ordinary income. So that's where, again, a Roth conversion comes into play. This is where you can take traditional funds, pre-tax funds, and instantly turn them into Roth funds. How do you do that? Well, you'd have to think about prepaying the tax, right? Taxes are going to be paid up front. I'm going to get more into this in just a second. But in order to do a Roth conversion, there are no earnings limits or contribution limits. So it's not like you can only convert $6,000 a year or $7,000 a year if you're 50, right? There's no earnings limits either on how much you can earn in a given year in order to do a Roth conversion. So the reason people do this is simply because they can, right? You have the ability to do it. And that's why this is also known as a backdoor Roth. It's a way for people who are generally not eligible to contribute to a Roth IRA to convert traditional funds into tax-free or Roth funds. Now, I will say the only restriction is the 5-year rule still applies. So if you convert money, it needs to stay in there for at least 5 years before you start withdrawing it, right? It's not convert it to tax-free dollars and start immediately taking it out, because otherwise you will be penalized because you haven't satisfied the 5-year rule yet. I mentioned taxes are paid up front. So if you have a pretty big balance, and let's say your TSP, and you wanted to convert that to Roth money, well, unfortunately, in order to convert it all, you'd have a pretty big tax liability in order to do so. Let's say you had $500,000 in your TSP, and you said, well, I want to turn this all into tax-free dollars. How can I do that? Well, we can take $500,000 one day, and the next day it's now tax-free. Voila. But you're going to get a big tax bill because it's going to be as if you earned an extra $500,000 for that tax year, which can not only bump you into a higher tax bracket, and you have to pay more on the converted amount, but you have to pay more tax on all the money you earned as income that year too, because you're in a totally new tax bracket. So that's where we can talk about partial Roth conversions. And that's a way that federal employees and others can take portions at a time and convert them gradually. So you're not stuck with a large tax bill. Let's go back to that $500,000 example. And let's say, and this is a question I normally ask federal employees to ask their CA or their accountant or tax professional. So well, if you're worried about going into higher tax brackets, ask them, how much more can you earn this year before going into a higher tax bracket? Or without bumping up a couple tax brackets, right? let's say that the number was, well, I found out that I'd be safe to convert only $100,000 a year. So we can take 500,000 and we can convert 100,000 per year each year until all 500,000 is fully converted 5 years from now. Now, instead of paying a tax bill on all 500,000 up front, you'd pay an incremental tax bill. You'd pay taxes on 100,000 each year for 5 years, and that would really limit your total tax liability over time. You'd end up paying less taxes, and then at the end of 5 years, the entire amount would be considered Roth and tax-free dollars. So really, you decided to prepay Uncle Sam. Here, Uncle Sam, you're no longer going to be my partner in retirement. I'm prepaying you what I owe you, and now my money is free and clear. All the earnings that I'm going to have in my account are going to grow and grow tax-free, and you can't touch any more of it. And that's a big, big, big concern that we get with federal employees. As I mentioned earlier, the reason we started talking about this and tax-free retirement strategies in our federal presentations and seminars is because it's feedback we're getting from you all. You're concerned about taxes going up in the future and what kind of a problem or issue that's going to have on your retirement, what kind of effect it's going to have on your bottom line, your net income. So you can take care of that now. And if you believe that you're going to be in a lower tax bracket today than you will be in the future, why not prepay the tax, or at least some of it, or gradually over time, so that when you get to that point, if taxes do go up, you don't owe a penny on those withdrawals from the Roth accounts. You'll still owe taxes on your pension and your Social Security benefits and some of your TSP, but you can eliminate a good amount of your taxes by prepaying them, either through incremental contributions in a Roth IRA or taking big lump sums of money from previous 401ks or IRAs and converting them either in a lump sum, one time, or gradually over time. I used a 5-year example, but it can be more than that. It can be 5, 6, 10 years. It can take you to convert everything, whatever's best for you and your situation. So I hope you enjoyed our talk today about tax-free retirement strategies using Roth IRAs. If you have any questions for us, please reach out to us, visit our website, thinkabx.com, ask questions, get a full review of your situation, and see if starting a Roth IRA or doing a Roth conversion is right for you, your situation, your family, your future, your retirement. Again, my name is Val Majewski. I'm the host of the Federal Retirement Show. I appreciate you taking the time to join me today to learn about this important topic, and we look forward to seeing you on a future episode.